Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through 4 food moments from the books of our favourite food writers. It's about all of life through the prism of food. And this week, in the second of a special series this summer, I'm talking about morning telly, mothers and matrescence with Shivi Ramoutar.
My constant thought is, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? And I don't think that ever goes. And she said, well, that's just being a mum. I don't think that will ever leave you.
Shivi is the Caribbean queen of morning TV. She's the chef on Mabuse's breakfast show, Garraway's Good Stuff, and she's cooked with the Kemps on Martin and Roman's Weekend Best. She's a regular guest on BBC's Saturday Kitchen and ITV's This Morning. Her latest book, Cook Clever, is packed with cook hacks. Oh, and she's a mother to 7 and 4-year-olds and a 9-month-old baby. In this series on matrescence, we want to explode the word into the national conversation to describe the process of mothering that never stops. It's estimated that perinatal mental health problems alone cost the NHS and social services around £1.2 billion annually. So Shivi was only too ready to share her journey so far. But first I asked her if Cook Clever was about showing people who might be a little daunted by making something that looks complicated a really simple way in.
That's exactly it. I mean, it's I think this book is on track with where I am in my life currently. And obviously I've gone from the first book where I was footloose, fancy-free, no children. I wasn't married yet. It was just simple. I had hours and hours to slave over the stove and throw myself into exciting different recipes. And with each book that's sort of come along, it's become a little bit more, what's the phrase, time-strapped. You know, you want to prepare something that's delicious, full of goodness, but there's hardly any time. And, you know, I'm not able to always focus and throw all my energy into the meal. There's like a lot of people across the nation, they're trying to do other things and still trying to put a nice meal on the table. So the idea of Cook Clever is to still give those flavors and the exciting adventures that food brings, but in a very simple way, using shortcuts. And it just so happens that if maybe you're a little bit nervous about, for example, cooking rice, which I know even the most excitingly adventurous chefs can still sometimes be foxed by the idea of cooking perfect rice. There are little shortcuts. There are ways that you shouldn't feel guilty about succumbing to, I'd say.
Yeah, go on, give us the shortcut on rice then.
Microwave rice. There is no problem with it. And, I know a lot of caterers and chefs who would have that to hand. They've just spent hours making the most wonderful meals to feed the guests. And for a quick fix for themselves, they grab a microwave rice, bung it in the microwave. And in that time, they're whipping up a sauce with a jar and whatnot. I think it's a lot about not turning a blind eye, but, allowing yourself to use some of these shortcuts. And not all of them are great, but there's some fantastic ones that are absolutely worthwhile.
And we are talking about cheats here. We are talking about pouches.
Yes.
We are talking about things that you buy on the supermarket shelves. It's almost illegal to be talking about this on Cooking Books, I have to say.
I feel terrible. I'm mortified to talk about this. And it's terrible that I feel the sense of mortification, really.
Well, no, so you should. It's plastic and it's absolutely unforgivable. But the point is that, you have done all these recipes to make it super easy for a lot of people who don't cook. And that's why we're talking to you today. We're also going to talk to you about matrescence. You've got 3 wildlings, as you call them. I'm very interested in that term. So we want to know where you're at with your matrescence. So all of that we're going to be talking about today. Let's talk about Cook Clever. Now, obviously, you've started Cook Clever because you now have you're juggling lots of plates. Because you were the Caribbean queen. That's what you were all about on telly now. Are you now the Caribbean cooking clever queen, or are you just about cooking clever on telly?
No, I think the Caribbean part is me. That's never going to disappear. And even with the Cook Clever, I always come back to these big flavors. There's always a Caribbean nod in a lot of the recipes. And actually, Caribbean food, as I always say, it really is about world cuisine, because it is for me the ultimate place of fusion food. And funnily enough, I did a 23andMe for other reasons on my son the other day, and it brought up a map of his DNA, and it was unbelievable. It was literally the history of the Caribbean, other than some of the European side that comes from his father. It was the history of the Caribbean in that map, and that's the food. Wow. That the Indian, the African, the Portuguese, the European, the indigenous elements. So for me, I've thrown myself into world food because it's very much what I'm about, who I am. So that element is still very important. But now I just happen to have to also cook clever because I don't have those hours anymore.
Well, I would love to read that book. Oh my God, My Son's DNA. I mean, because that is, you're absolutely right. We've done a lot of books recently about, the backstory of the Caribbean with Melissa Thompson and Riaz Phillips. And it's these secret kitchens, the stuff that we don't know. And of course, it's about a history of colonization and influence from all sorts of different cultures. So, do that one, please. In the meantime, it is really important what you're doing on television. You are teaching people how to cook. When you do a book like Cook Clever, are you thinking of those people who do not cook still? How do you visualise what they can do and what they can't do?
So for me, I think my biggest aim with this book and with what I do on TV is, any meal cooked in the kitchen is a win. If it starts with microwave rice and eventually it progresses to cooking rice, brilliant. But the idea of somebody just boiling pasta and opening a jar and grating cheese, if the alternative would have been to buy something, Deliveroo something, that is a little step in the right direction. It's just for me about building confidence. And I think the book really is about finding ways, I talk a lot about knife skills, that if you have them, brilliant. And knife skills are extremely important in the kitchen. However, it should not be a barrier to you going into the kitchen in the first place. So if you can't chop, which so many people can't, it's okay. Start with a grater, start with using scissors to snip, and eventually that confidence will then bring in the knife and whatnot. So it is very much being wary of how I'm presenting things, but in a way that I'm any meal that somebody can cook in the kitchen, if they wouldn't have made something before, is a win. So that really is it. And whilst I'm not at that level, I still embrace with open arms the grating and the snipping, because it just means that I can multitask in a safer way, in a quicker way, than just simply making meals purely from scratch, which I would do on the weekend. So there is also a time and place for this kind of cooking.
And what kind of feedback do you get on your social media when people are trying recipes out? Where do the cheats, where does the kind of the cutting the corners, where does that really help people? Do you get a sense of that?
I do, and I do put it out there. And sometimes I'm extremely nervous. I did a whole reel. I'm terrible at reels. I think it's a reel. It's either a reel or a video post. But it was about using jarred peppers. So the jarred roasted peppers that are ready roasted. They're one of my favourite cheats. And I just sort of set up a little question, saying, do you use convenient, what's the convenient ingredient that you use that makes you feel a bit squirmish, a bit embarrassed to mention? And so many people said, yes, I use jarred peppers, or I use ready chopped onions, or the microwave rice, I have to say, is actually a very common one. So, it does open up a lot of discussion, and I'm as real as I can be about it. If I'm doing events or if I'm doing a supper club, of course, I'm not going to use microwave rice for you, but midweek, if I don't have rice in the freezer, I will not be ashamed. And it's taken me a long time to build, to work out the shame here, to work past the shame and say, I will buy that microwave rice. I will open that jar of pesto.
I'm surprised. I mean, you do talk about how snobby we are about shortcuts, but actually I would have thought that those examples are something that everybody would use. I certainly do, jar of pesto. I also make my own pesto, but, and I also use a jar of bell peppers. But what I wouldn't use, and what I was surprised that you used, is, a plastic bag of ready chopped onions, because by the time you've been to the supermarket to buy them and you're worried about how on earth you're going to recycle that properly, you can have watched a YouTube on how to chop an onion.
So, and I make a really big point of this in the introduction. So I actually personally haven't used the frozen onions of chopped onions. My shortcut would be using spring onions in certain dishes, or using baby onions. And but again, I try not to draw judgment, because there are some people who, if that is what they go to, that is absolutely fine. I'm not going to be somebody who says, you should not do this, because I think I don't want to shame anybody for making any attempt to be cooking in the kitchen, because all I want to do is get more people in the kitchen and enjoying the cooking of the process of making a meal for whatever family they have, whether it's them and their dog, their husband, their children. So I never want to shame anybody, but I have set it out that for me, I think spring onions in certain situations are a perfect substitute for onions. Obviously, with Indian cooking or certain cuisines, you really want the caramelization, the browning of the onion. However, it is up to you to find your way.
I'm literally in the middle of editing the latest episode of the Food Foundation podcast, and I've just been talking to a single mum with a 1-year-old baby, and she's just moved into a housing association flat, and she hasn't got an oven, and she's got a microwave, and that's the best that she can do apart from a NutriBullet. And we've just been talking about how actually you feed a 1-year-old healthily with such limited appliances even. So yeah, we know there are a lot of issues out there, and there's absolutely no shaming in cutting corners. Let's start going through some of your really interesting food moments. I was interested in what you said about fusion. I spotted your fusion all the way through, and your fusion cheats is your first food moment. It's the corn dumpling soup, and it's a Trini dumpling with packet gnocchi.
Oh no, it's something that my mum would literally just be, what are you doing? She's my biggest fan, but also my harshest critic. But then I'd give it to her to try, and she said, okay, I can see it. It was I do have to try a lot of recipes on her because she is brutally honest. And then it's all about weighing up the fact that actually to make the dumpling, the mess, the weighing, all of that feel. And you just buy a packet of gnocchi and in it goes. It does the same job. And again, it's not going to be the stuff that I serve at a supper club. But in that moment in time, I can give my children food and give my husband food and enjoy it myself and still get that feeling, that nostalgic food moment that I would do where I'm making the whole thing from scratch.
Yeah, that's what the point, isn't it? It's making culturally appropriate food or teaching your kids to really understand some of the sense of Trinidadian food,
yes.
For example. You also talk about Mumbai roasted potatoes and microwave bibimbap being some of your favourites. Tell us about those.
So again, this is... And I'm always very conscious of saying that this is my loving nod to that dish. There is not a single ounce of authenticity in these recipes. I will be kicked out of any place I go to visit saying this is my it's just my take on it. And it's again using flavours from Mumbai or from Korea with those flavours and using them in a way that is similar to those well-beloved dishes, but in moments like the micro zap bibimbap. I love a pun, I love a rhyme, as you probably pick up through the book. That is one of my favourite dishes, and it's I use gochujang there, which you now can find everywhere. In my local Tesco Metro, they have the little jars of Tesco own brand gochujang, which is great because I think it's making it more accessible for everybody. And it is so simple. And it's, as I said, it's by no means the long, hard slog of the bibimbap, the love and all the different ingredients that go into it, but it does the job. It gives you that feeling of, oh, this is different, this is exciting. And I was able to prepare it using a microwave and a pan just to cook the beef if you wanted to do that or not. So it's about, hopefully I'm trying to sort of bring those exciting flavours as lovingly nodding, there's never authenticity in these. I'm very wary of the cultural appropriation element, but making them just easily accessible and something that can whisk people away without lifting a finger, really.
Yeah. The whole thing about cultural appropriation, if you take a country like Trinidad and Tobago, there are so many cultural influences in there anyway. So you kind of give them a bit permission to play around with your flavours.
Absolutely. And I think it is really difficult because I when I talk about cultural appropriation from a personal point of view, the food that's become loved in Trinidad and some of our national dishes have purely come to chance because of cultural appropriation. We have pilau, which is an Iranian-inspired dish. Our Jamaican patties, now of course that's Jamaican, but I always love using this. It's always shocking when I say that actually that's been inspired by Cornish pasties. It's the beautiful fusion. It can be looked at in another way. It's a fusion of these stunning cultures that have created this food, and obviously there's a lot of heartbreak and a lot of terrible things that have happened from the Caribbean and the food represents some of that as well. So I think it can be very emotive, can't it?
Well, it's about story, isn't it? And as long as we tell those stories and we understand and we use those stories to explain what food is and where it comes from, I think it's endlessly interesting. You use meal mathematics. And your second food moment is take a tin of beans. And I did this just now for lunch, actually, just to see how super easy it is. Of course it is. I had black beans, strangely. I don't actually buy black beans, but my daughter likes making burgers out of black beans. So I used those in this second food moment. Tell us about why you're using mathematics with a tin of beans.
So the whole meal mathematics chapter and the take a tin of beans epitomizes this. Really is about a lot of store cupboard staples and leftovers and odds and ends that very commonplace. Things like you find a tin of beans in your cupboard, whether it's baked beans, cannellini, black beans, kidney beans. You can always make a meal out of it and make that the star of the meal. And the idea is that you chop and change elements. You have different flavors. So whether you use flavor pastes, you have textures, whether you use, crunchy nut toppings, seed toppings, fresh herbs with those elements. And it always reminds me of Ottolenghi, because I find that's his signature, right? You go into an Ottolenghi deli and the colour, you get the texture, the flavours. So that is a lot of inspiration for this chapter, in the sense that you can chop and change and you can find a bit of these elements, the flavour, the texture, the freshness, and you put them together, and hopefully I've given you enough options there that you will be able to make a meal out of the bits you have in your home, in your kitchen, and it's satisfying, it's delicious and exciting, and it's never the same the next time round, because you can change something up, or maybe you don't have an ingredient that you did last time.
And you've got lots of diagrams in there. It does make you look like a scientist, which is great. But the bottom line is, take a bit of this, take a bit of that, and you can't go wrong.
Well, exactly.
And it is exactly what you were just saying, that sort of the taking texture, flavour and crunch. I mean, so many writers who I've interviewed on this show over the last 3 years have said that in so many different ways. But it is the absolute key to having something amazing on your plate, isn't it?
It's the ultimate meal mathematics, really, isn't it? And I kind of feel that with underneath the Cook Clever heading, again, it's bolstering confidence in the kitchen. So if you use that formula, then slowly you can step away from needing the book and you remember, these are the elements I need. So again, every little recipe in every part of the book is just to keep bolstering confidence and making life easy. Hopefully it achieves all of that.
Exactly. And flavour can come from the dollop. Always have a dollop. And that is generally a sauce or just a bit of colour. It might be a pesto or something like that, or harissa or something, just a dollop. Rubble trouble. One more of your little rhymes here. Third food moment. Tell us about this one.
So again, in this similar kind of setup, these are 4 simple recipes, and one of my favourites, I'm obsessed with it, is the fried herby capers. So again, the idea here is I will happily open that jar of pesto, chuck in that pasta, let it boil and mix the two together. And just to make it feel that I've given that extra little bit of love and I've given it something of myself, I would throw over the crispy capers or the lemon chorizo crumb, and that on top of a basic sandwich or salad just adds the pizzazz, just takes it, elevates it to a different level, and it makes me feel less guilty for having opened that jar of pesto, having bought that sandwich, which we all still do, and it's fine.
I'm surprised that's the second time you've mentioned guilt and shame around a jar of pesto. I'm worried about your relationship with a jar of pesto.
Do you know what it was? I think there's been and it's different, and it is different, but I was fed so much, especially during COVID, this making your own, this everything done from scratch is always better. So there's so much for me of overcoming that. And I think writing this book, it should have been that sort of breakthrough. And it is. And I'm still amazing that I am still convincing myself that it is okay. It's absolutely fine. Obviously, it's clearly a big thing in my past, right?
Clearly. I mean, I think it's fine as long as there are no, health claims, or there's not extra salt or sugar in there. I mean, just learn to read the jars and don't trust the retailers who are telling you that something is super healthy. But a jar of pesto is all right, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
And, I talk about using, having in your freezer ready to go gyoza dumplings and lots of different basic bits and bobs. And I have made a point to say, do check the ingredients, and as long as it's for you, as natural as possible, not with too many additives and, OTT sugar and salt and whatnot, then great.
Yeah, absolutely. the role of the TV chef in Instagram is actually about making something super easy and looking really good. And your instant crumbing technique is again a way of elevating something simple, isn't it? It's your fourth food moment. Tell us why you chose this one, and also how that kind of works in your Instagram focus, because of course it must be, because your publisher would be banging on your door to make sure that you were doing just that.
I think there are not many people who really would say no to a crispy bit of chicken or a crispy bit of fish. There is something so pleasurable about biting into something crunchy, and the process of crumbing or paneing, for the official word, the flour, egg, breadcrumb. It's so faffy. It's just, you can look at it as a meditative moment, but actually in real life, especially with a crazy household, I just don't have the time for that. So this instant crumbing technique, by way of just using a greaseproof paper, your chicken or your fish, the breadcrumbs sprinkled over it, and the other side of the greaseproof paper just pounded just gently with a rolling pin or your hand, it does the job absolutely brilliantly. Yes, it's not quite to the level of the crumb of the panade version. However, it ticks the box, and it's crispy, and it's wonderful, and it's so, I wouldn't say fully mess-free, but it's minimal mess. You get a bit of greaseproof paper with the crumb on it, and that just goes straight into the recycling bin. Once you've rinsed it, that's it. It's done. And it's just easy. It's much easier, because I find a lot of the time, if I've done, so in the past I did a katsu curry, and the katsu, I'd have people saying, oh, this is great, but I can't be bothered to do can I use ready-made chicken nuggets from the supermarket? Yes, you can do that, but also this is a very quick and easy way to do it, and it works so well with fish, as I said, and it's again a very simple way to achieve something that may be a little bit more far-reaching for some people.
Well, and also uses our leftover breadcrumbs. I mean, you've always got a bit of a heel of a piece of bread or something,
Yes.
Like most people in the world, certainly all the Europeans, use it. Let it stale. Let it go stale, and then just
blitz it up
with absolutely blitz it up, and there it is. There's your breadcrumbs. So that's a really good way of teaching people to
not waste,
reminding people about how easy it is and cheap to use your leftovers and avoid waste.
Absolutely, and with breadcrumbs always, I tend to blitz up loads and freeze it as well. It's always good to have it in the freezer before it goes off.
Yeah, another top tip: batch cooking. There you go. Now you've made lots of references to the mad chaos of being a mum of 3 kids and juggling lots of plates. How are you getting on with your matrescence? This is a word that is about process, and the idea of it is to, kind of like adolescence. People understand that it takes a long time to become an adult. What about becoming a mother? Where are you at?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, every day I question myself. Like my mum, I was in the studio yesterday, and so my wonderful mum comes and helps look after the children when I'm not here. And we were talking this morning, and she was just talking about my eldest, and I was just saying, every day there's something new that's thrown your way, and my constant thought is, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? And I don't think that ever goes. And she said, well, that's just being a mum. I don't think that will ever leave you. So I kind of feel I'm at the start of what I hope will be a very, very, very long path of trying to understand what being a mother means. I mean, it's what is it? It's you need to be there for your children, but you also, what I'm struggling with at the moment is finding my own space as well, aside from work, because obviously I leave to go to work, but there's a space in my head where I find it very difficult, and I think it must be the same for every mother, of having a moment where you are not fully thinking about your children. And I think it's healthy to have that moment for yourself as well. I think that's, what do they say, you need your cup to be full before you can give. And I think a lot of women feel guilty about that, because I should always be thinking about my children.
It's that airline thing, isn't it? Put your own oxygen mask on first.
Yes.
I remember when my kids were tiny, I was thinking, really? That's just completely unintuitive. But you're absolutely right. What do you do? How old are your kids?
So I've got 7, 4, and just 9 months.
Oh my!
I know.
So as we're speaking, your baby is asleep.
Yes.
Your 4 and 7 presumably. Well, where are they?
So they're
holidays?
at a drama camp today, drama camp this week. So the key is for summer, and we're around for most of summer at home, is just activities. I mean, we do allow ourselves, as long as they're out in the morning and they come back late afternoon, I think it is important for children to understand boredom and how to be resourceful. I think that is really important. But otherwise, go play football, go to drama, go swimming, do as much as you get to the park, you know.
And then can you give yourself permission, Shivi, to have some time for yourself, or do you just go straight into cleaning the house and sorting out the admin?
I haven't, so I'm still, this is a really big part of it for me. I haven't found that guilt-free. Everything I do, if I get a cup of tea with a biscuit, it's let's put the washing in, all right, let's think about what's happening later. I haven't quite got that balance of, and I'm working on it, because the fact that I mentioned the whole thing about trying to fill my own cup, I'm trying to work out how to do that. I know, I understand right now, especially with the little one, it's very difficult to do that for myself. However, what I've started understanding with the children, and in a form of accepting my children for who they are, and they're all very different, and, you know, I think my generation, and as generations go on, it changes, but I was very much in a place where not children are seen and not heard, but it was a little bit more, these are the way things are done. And particularly being raised in a Trinidadian household where, you know, things are tough, you know, and my parents were constantly thinking of how to make things better for us. And the whole move to the UK, when we moved, it was all for us. And my parents sacrificed so much for me and my sisters. And, you know, and I see it, and I think that's an element of my guilt, in the sense that this generation is different. We are, I don't want to say more selfish, but we are a bit more selfish, or, you know, we are more aware of the importance of the self-care element, which I know for my parents, that was not a thing. And it is important, but with that comes so much guilt for me as well, understanding that balance that I was used to, my parents literally throwing everything they could to help my sisters and I, and help us find the right path and whatnot. And I'm just at crossroads, you know, how much do I throw myself in? How much do I believe in faith that you give them what you can and they will find the tools, which I think is very important. You know, you want to build resilient children who can manage and be themselves. And, you know, also I was brought up in a time where options in life was a lawyer, a doctor, and accountant. That was always the holy trinity. That is your options. That's the only options. And it's very difficult for me to try to step away from wanting the same for my children, because that's all I knew. And I know full well, particularly my eldest, he is an artist. He's destined to do that. And I'm still there thinking, yes, but, you know, the stability and so that, you know, clearly in my head, this is like a therapy session, I'm finding. I'm battling a lot in this path. I'm battling so much on this path. And you just never know, right, whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. All you can do is just give them the love and feed them well. That's what I can offer them.
I think so. And I think that, you know, actually, you know, mothers of 4 and 7 and babies in particular, but I think 4 and 7, I remember feeling all that you're talking about more when they were 4 and 7 than at any other time. Am I doing it right? You know, that, you know, you talk about the guilt and shame of pesto. My goodness, you know, the guilt and shame of being a mother who might not be doing it right. It's extraordinary, isn't it? How's your mum getting on with her matrescence? Because, you know, I'm talking to women of all ages and stages, and I don't think that learning to become a mother ever finishes. How's she doing?
I find my mum an absolute hero. I just think, you know, so she had us when she was very young. I think she entered the world of matrescence at 20, so very young. And, you know, there are 3 of us and we're 9 years apart. And I think it must have been incredibly tough for them. They moved over. My mum moved with the 3 of us. My father was working. He's a doctor in the UK, and she was left initially with a lot of bringing the 3 of us up in a new country. I think it was incredibly tough for her. And, you know, Caribbean parents, as any Caribbean child will know, are super strict. There's so much love. There's so much, you know, the biggest fans, harshest critic, but they're strict, you know.
Yeah.
So I remember, and this must have been a tricky thing for her, moving to a different country where children are brought up in a slightly different way, and trying to bring 3 children up, 3 girls up, and being probably very scared of what's happening in this, you know, it's very different to Trinidad and the sort of more, you walk to school. We couldn't walk to school where we were. Well, we could, but it's a very long walk. But I look at her now and, it's amazing how when you become a mother, how much you appreciate and you understand. All of a sudden, this sort of light switches on and you're like, I get it now, Mum. I really get it. And I speak to her, and every day, she'd say she's so proud of us and how incredibly tough it was, the whole journey and coming across to the UK and just bringing up children generally it's wonderful, but it's incredibly tough. And I think she's at this point of understanding, and we're moving into what I think a mother and daughter relationship of also friendship and understanding, and it's absolutely wonderful, And I'm sure, she's watching us raise children, and she's great. She'll have suggestions, but she'll do it in a way that's not, and she probably knows better. She's done it, had years and years of it, but she's very mindful of how she suggests it. And I'm sure in my teens, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm so grateful for her. I don't know from her perspective, but I would say that I think she's reached, for me, what I would hope to achieve at a stage with my children, to have a relationship, a friendship, and a mutual respect. And it is wonderful. It really is wonderful. And I'm extremely grateful.
Thanks for listening. Do pop over to my Substack for much more each week throughout August on matrescence from my superstar guests.